Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to my senior recital slash project. Um, my name is Kurt Milan. If you don't know, that's weird because I invited all of you here. First things first, I would like to say a huge thank you to my wonderful accompanist, John Warfel, who's been nothing but great and spectacular my entire time here. That being said, we are going to go ahead and start today's program. So if you have been to or attended other North Central recitals, you'll know that, the majority of the time they come out here and they play their wonderful instruments or sing some beautiful tunes for the entire time. Today's is going to be slightly different, mainly because it's going to be some lecture based. So we're going to be discussing Suzuki's Violin Book 1 and how that particularly sets you up to be able to play something as difficult and intricate as the Haydn Violin Concerto, which you just heard me play. So that being said, tune in. Hopefully you'll be able to learn something. My goal today is for you to be able to gain some knowledge, gain a little bit of background on the violin and setting up for that kind of a foundation, because I plan to be a string instructor, string teacher, or whatever the world decides to give me. And I want to be able to teach music, and my goal is to be able to do that for you here today. So that being said, let's go ahead and discuss. So originally we were supposed to be posting up the program onto the Facebook page, and I came about a couple of problems. So that being said, I'm just going to give you a full rundown of what we will be doing today. So the Suzuki Violin Book 1 does prep us up for three kind of main ideas that we will be focusing on today. First one being position, followed by intonation, and last is going to be bow control, bowing / tone. And we'll discuss why that last grouping is grouped rather than just having one straight subject. The best part is we get to tie all of this into the concerto, hearing like the actual part of it being tied together and hearing pieces and excerpts specifically from the violin concerto that show these main characteristics from Violin Book 1. So the first topic today is going to be position. With position, there's quite a bit to talk about, and we're going to be getting some basic run-throughs, some basic ideas. But the main goal for position with violin and playing the violin is not only for the student to be able to kind of play something as long as this, or even for the rest of their life, playing music in general, but they have to want to do that as well. One of the main culprits on why string players, especially most violin players, decide that they don't want to do it anymore is because they find out that something hurts. Their back is hurting, their knees are hurting, something is uncomfortable for them. And that is definitely something that we want to prevent. So why don't we go ahead and get started. The first thing that you want to be paying attention to when playing the violin is making sure that you have a good foundation, making sure that your body is set up properly. So for me, and I like saying this as well, you want to have kind of like that left foot slightly staggered, feet shoulder width apart, just keeping that for your base, Then we move up to the knees. With your knees, you're going to definitely want to have some micro bend, because keeping your knees locked is not a good idea, and no one likes passing out on stage. So make sure you've got that nice micro bend in your knees. Now moving up, we discuss, your upper body and how that locks in as well. For younger students, I tend to tell them the song head, shoulders, knees, and toes. That usually works best for them. You also want to make sure that your hips are included with that too. So make sure that, everything is stacked up, your body is nicely stacked up, your head is on top of your shoulders, and all of that. which, normally you would think I don't have to say that all the time, but a lot of people do actually tend to stand either like this or they'll overarch their back. So you want to make sure everything is lined up. Again, the head, shoulders, knees, and toes works best for the younger students, and some adult students are kind of just like, that's boring, I don't like that. Instead, what I usually try and tell my older students, my adult students, is think of a string from the back of your heel lining up all the way through your body and out the top of your head. That way everything is nice and lined up, still keeping that micro bend in your knees. So that being said, one of those two tips usually tends to help best with these students and how they can focus on keeping that posture, keeping that stance nice and locked in. That being said, we also want to discuss having the proper equipment, whether it's your violin and making sure that that is nicely fitted to you, making sure that's the right size. You don't want to start, like a fourth grader who's super teeny tiny and you give them a full-size violin. Being someone that went through that was a very uncomfortable time of my life, trying to play something that's way too big for me. So you want to make sure you have the right size instrument for that age group. You also want to make sure that you have a comfortable set of items. So making sure that your shoulder rest is nice and comfy. You don't have to go out and splurge like on a crazy amount for some super nice one. You can use a sponge, just something that'll offer that padding when you bring the violin up to your body. So those also go lined up with the idea of posture and positioning, just making sure that you have the right materials to set you up for success. Now we're going to actually talk about propping up the violin itself. So when you bring the violin up, the main thing that you want to do is actually bring the violin to your body. Most younger students will say, okay, my violin's up, and then they do this. And that's not bringing it to your body, that's bringing your body to your violin. And if you sit like this for, maybe more than 20 minutes, that's not going to feel comfortable. So you want to make sure you're bringing that thing up to you, setting it nicely onto, like right on your collarbone, your shoulder area. That way you've got the violin nice and set up there. Your left hand, which we will discuss first, because the right hand gets its own like whole portion. The left hand, you want to make sure that we are preventing what we call the pizza hand. So we want to keep our wrists nice and straight. You don't want to do this. The reason why it's called the pizza hand, back when the world wasn't in this pandemic and you can go out and go to restaurants and everything, your server is going to come around the corner with your food and their hands are like this with like 8,000 things balanced on there because they're magicians and they can just do that. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that our wrist is nice and straight and relaxed, right? That way you can move about the instrument, place your fingers with the proper weight, and if you're up to shifting that as well. Most students are going to think, well, I need to hold my violin up. That thing's heavy. It's a piece of wood, I need to hold that up. No, you don't. Your left hand is basically just going to be supporting it, but as you can see, you actually don't need your left hand to keep the violin up. That's going to be the pressure from your jaw and your chin as well as your shoulder. That's kind of just weighing it down and comfortably sitting right there. So left hand should not be getting tired from actually holding the violin up. As for the right hand, like I said, we're going to be discussing like a full section on bowing and everything, but we'll just kind of go over the basic ideas of actually setting up your fingers and your bow hand and your bow hold. So if you've got a pencil at home, or if you have a bow at home, which would be cool if you just have a bow lying around at home, if you have one of those or a pencil, go ahead and grab that. What you're going to do is take that pencil and you're going to start by placing it in this little area right around the first line of your fingers, your middle and ring finger, right? That's where your bow is going to set. And you're going to put your thumb right behind it. After that, you can kind of relax your fingers. You always want to keep your fingers curved and relaxed. If your fingers are straight out like this, or if you've got like that micro bend where your fingers like curve the other way, yeah, it's a little too tense. Instead, you want to make sure that you're keeping your fingers nice and curved and relaxed. So yeah, you've got the thumb there lined up right with the middle and ring finger. Pinky is the hardest part. Pinky is going to sit directly on top of the bow or the pencil, depending on what you're using. So that guy's going to sit right on top, and your pointer finger is just going to kind of lay down there. So here's my example. I hope you enjoy it. Thumb and pinky need to be bent. That's your main goal. Everything else kind of just like relaxes and kind of just droops over. Um, and that is that section. So make sure that when working with your fingers, working with your bow hold, you keep that idea in check constantly. Now, the way Suzuki, other than actually showing you pictures and discussing kind of what it should look like for posture and stance as well as your bow hold, the way that Suzuki ties all of that into his book, allowing it to link to our Haydn concerto, is basically the idea of stamina and endurance. So if you properly set up your body to be able to stand there for 6, 7 minutes straight, playing all the way through, that is by creating that proper foundation, creating that proper posture, and then playing a piece in the book. So, for example, Suzuki, towards the end of the book, about 2/3 of the way through, he throws in the beautiful Bach minuets, right? So we've got Bach minuet 1, 2, and 3, and the reason why this has any form of importance is if you play these 3 Bach minuets all the way through with the repeats, it's about equivalent to the same amount of time and duration as the Haydn violin concerto. So I get to show you that. So I hope you get to kind of sit back, enjoy the 3 Bach minuets in Suzuki's Violin Book 1. Great. So you got to sit and tune in and hear the Bach minuets. And again, the way that uh, Suzuki ties all of that to building up that foundation and building up to be able to play something like that is endurance and stamina. So by building up that posture, building up the proper stance, you'll be able to play those three minuets, which is equivalent to the same length of time. So that's the end of our our discussion about posture and position. Now we're going to go ahead and move into the next topic, which is intonation. Now with violin, there are quite a few things that kind of play into keeping that intonation, being able to maintain strong intonation. Um, so the first one, and the best way to check your intonation is one, making sure your violin and the notes that you're playing are matching that of the pitches played on a tuned piano. Make sure that it's tuned, otherwise you are just playing wrong notes with a poorly tuned piano, and that won't work out well for you. So make sure the piano's tuned, as well as using a tuner, whether it's like an app or you've got one of the old, original tuners that have the little arm that kind of tell you whether or not you're right on the money. Using that and checking your pitches is a great way to check your intonation. When you're doing that, you use kind of a bit of a visual, though, right? So you can see whether or not you're in tune by using a tuner. We always, as string players, need to train our ears, though, and that's even for any musician. You want to make sure that your ears are doing a good job, making sure that they're also working. So one of the good exercises that you can do, which Suzuki does kind of discuss and provides, is tonalization. Now, with tonalization, it kind of trains the student to hear the pitches that are supposed to be in that key so that they kind of can hear whether or not they are still in tune. Starting this idea with a younger age and then building up is going to help the player kind of grow a strong sense of intonation. And tonalization is a great exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and play this one for you. Warning, it is very slow. So just hang in there. But yes, here's tonalization by Suzuki. So by playing an exercise such as tonalization, you're able to kind of work on that oral training, work on hearing those notes, making sure everything is nice and in tune, and that kind of just builds off of that foundation of making sure that that student is also working their ears and not just relying on visuals. Now, with visuals, students also get the fun sensation of what we call ringing tones. This is a great thing to use when checking on intonation. And let's kind of just discuss what ringing tones are. So, ringing tones are when you play a note on the instrument that is equivalent to a open string. So, say I'm playing an A, which would be third finger on the E string. If that is nice and in tune, that will cause my A string to vibrate. And the best part about that, and this, younger students love this, you could actually visually see the vibration of that string as you were playing that note. And that'll work for any string. If you're playing, if you're playing a G on your your G string is going to vibrate, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to show you a couple quick examples. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but you'll be able to definitely hear that extra tone ringing in the background because it's just going to carry through. So tune in and see if you could spot that. So yes, with ringing tones, super good way to check your intonation, especially when working on pieces and music. If you play, a D on one of your pieces, and you need to know whether or not that's in tune without whipping out a tuner or checking on a piano, if your string vibrates, and as long as that is in tune, you'll be set, and it's always a good sign. Also, it's fun, like just playing that right there, good time. It was awesome. So ringing tones are super helpful and really comfortable, and they just help the student be able to tie both a visual and oral kind of thing from the instrument into actually playing. Now, when thinking about intonation, we kind of course, we'll discuss the simple things that we focus on. So the proper weight of the finger, placing them all, on the tapes, which, as you can see on my violin, I don't have tapes. Tapes go away after some time because after a while from playing, you kind of just get very used to knowing where your fingers are, as well as relying on your ear to make sure that your strings or that your notes are in tune. Another good way to visually see something with your instrument. But we talk about the weight of the fingers being pressed onto the string, and then how that affects your intonation, and making sure that that focus in your left hand is nice and strong. That's what we kind of refer to as like a little bit more of a simple focus. Now, in Suzuki, he gets to kind of go into a little bit of a more focused idea of intonation. So one of the things that he does very well in book one is discussing the concept of the finger before bow movement. Now, what that means is if you've got a set of notes, one after the other, you want to make sure that each of those notes are placed with the finger before the movement of the bow. Otherwise, you kind of have a little bit of a grace note or like a pickup in the middle of right before you're about to play it, and we don't want that. We want to have each note being able to hear each note isolated before you move on to the next one. So in Suzuki, we're going to go ahead and jump into the Song of the Wind, and I'm going to go ahead and play an example on the focus of keeping that finger before bow movement so that we can make sure that we've got a good sound coming out of our instrument. So to show you a little excerpt, I only played like 5 measures of it, but these eighth notes, which is basically what this piece is made up of, has to have each tone actually played before you can move to the next one. If you're placing your finger after you move the bow, you get these grace notes, and it takes away from the proper sound that you want from it. So I'm going to play you what it's not supposed to sound like. I don't know about you, but I did not find that one pretty. So you want to make sure that each of your fingers are isolated and ready to go before the movement of the bow. And that's just an example that he provides in Song of the Wind. If he goes on through more of the book, we get to touch up on more pieces that also have that idea. The next one we're going to discuss is perpetual motion, which is about halfway through the book. In perpetual motion, if you're familiar with it, it is all just eighth notes all the way through. So I'm going to go ahead and play you the first line of perpetual motion and how it should sound using kind of that isolated finger before bow movement. So if you were to sit there and play that piece without having each finger isolated and set before moving the bow, you're basically just throwing a bunch of grace notes all over the place, and you won't actually be able to hear the tune or the pitches that you're aiming to play. With perpetual motion, you can do a fun approach which actually does help kind of set you up for that. And the way you would go about doing that is placing a rest in between every note. So in order to do that, you got to go really, really slow. I always like to use a metronome for this part. That way you can hear and place a beat on each note that you're playing, as well as hearing the beat for the rest. This lets you really take time to move your finger while the bow is completely still. So I'm just going to play the first measure of that with the idea of having those rests in between. So by placing those rests, it really solidifies the fact that my finger has to be placed before the bow is even allowed to move. And if you could hear or see, I don't know how great the quality of the camera is, but if you could see, each time I had that rest, I would place my finger on that rest. That way I'm still counting, and it helps reassure the student that they are still on beat by just double checking that if your finger is landing on a rest while you're not playing, then they're keeping that tempo in mind. And that's always really, really nice. Now, we get to tie this idea of this finger before bow movement into the Haydn concerto. So in Haydn, around measure 32, we have a set of notes that are fast, right? They're quick, they're eighth notes, and we need to make sure that we're isolating each finger before the movement of the bow. So why don't I go ahead and play you this little excerpt from the Haydn concerto. So you see in that excerpt, you've got a set of 16th notes first, or if you can't see, you hear it. You hear all of those notes, right? And then it picks up even quicker, and then you've got a set of 32nd notes where you're flying right through. So without having that finger before bow movement, your notes are kind of just going to slur together, and you won't have that controlled, isolated tone of each of those notes. And we always want to make sure that we have that sound while we are playing, making sure that you can hear each individual note, giving it its right amount of time before moving forward. So playing these notes a little bit slower with that space in mind is always just going to help reassure or confirm that you're getting those isolated tones first. Now we get to move into the topic of bowing and tone. So the reason why we have bowing and tone in the same grouping is because without proper bowing technique, without having a solid foundation of moving the bow, you're not going to be able to get a good tone. So let's talk about this real quick. The reason why they're grouped together, can't get a good tone. So make sure that you've got the idea of bowing set first before you sit there and really try and focus on the tone quality of the playing, because you can't focus on tone without the bow being set. So before we can sit there and talk about that, we need to know the direction and the movement of the bows. So if you are at home, again, and have a pencil or a bow at home, that'd be great. We're going to talk about how you can kind of discuss the basics of bow movement. So when you're playing the violin, we call specific bow movements with direction down or up bows, right? If your violin is set up, like so, and you tell a new student who has just mastered their bow hold, give me a down bow, I have seen students do this. They'll just put the bow down, because when you're standing, this is down, right? And when I've seen, they also, it makes me kind of giggle a little bit, because I'm like, okay, show me an up bow, and they'll just put the bow in the air. I'm like, this is great. But yeah, you want to make sure that these students know the difference of what we call up and down bow. So the easiest way to do this, if you're at home, grab your pencil or your bow, because this is going to get interactive. You're going to hold your bow vertically first. So if you got your bow, then down bow and up bow makes more sense, right? Your down bow is actually in the direction downward, while upward is going up. Now you apply that to your violin. Down bow is still the same movement. This time you're just going, instead of going straight down, you're moving this direction. Up bow is that direction. Some students don't like trying to apply this to a horizontal idea. So instead, I think of an in and out. So a down bow would be out and away from your body, while an up bow would be in and towards your body. Again, just a simple way to kind of discuss and think about how that direction of bowing is going to be going. Now, earlier we talked about the actual right hand, the bow hand, right? So making sure that our bow hold is set, making sure our fingers are nice and relaxed, that pinky is bent, that thumb is bent, all the fun stuff with the right hand. And now we're just going to slowly move up our arm. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is going to be the square of the bow arm, right? So if I've got my violin set up, we're going to see how many things I could do at once. If I've got my violin set up, right here, where it's my forearm and my upper arm, that's what we call the square of the bow arm. Now we need to maintain that square of the bow arm, because if that starts to go away, the bow starts to move in a direction that we don't want. Our goal when bowing is to keep parallel to the bridge and the fingerboard, right? So if our arm loses that square of the bow arm and we do kind of like this kind of thing, the bow's going to go crooked. You're not going to get a pretty sound, and I will show you exactly what that sounds like. So first, bow arm, you got the square, get a good sound. If you do this, not pretty. So by keeping that square of the bow arm and really controlling that movement of the bow, it's way easier to keep that locked in and have that good tone. If you could hear how scratchy and wispy it was by letting your bow arm, that square, kind of just fade away, you lose that control and you lose that tone. So by focusing on that square, you get a really, really nice sound. Now, if we're moving up the arm, like said earlier, we go from the idea of the square of the bow arm into the upper arm, which is your bicep tricep area. So with the upper part of your arm, that shouldn't move when you're playing. That should be still. The only time this kind of upper area moves is when you're moving strings, which is going to be lowering and raising your elbow. But this shouldn't move while you're playing, right? And it's usually hard for students to think about, because you've got that square of the bow arm set, and you kind of just want to start, because trying to isolate it is weird. So the best way to think about keeping that still is by thinking of your elbow as like a door hinge, or for those of you that have fences, like a fence, something that opens and closes. So when you have your arm set and you've already got the idea of the square of the bow arm, you want to think of the hinge being in your elbow and you're opening and closing the door or the fence, So you're keeping this upper part still while this part gets to move, open, and close. Now, when you sit there and you think about that, it's kind of just like, well, if I have my bow like this, and I'm only opening and closing, you can see how close the bow gets to my face, right? So you actually do have to kind of get some wrist action in there, making sure that you've got a good flow and really focusing on keeping the bow parallel with the bridge and the fingerboard. It really just kind of helps being able to see that and lining it up while you're playing. So again, this guy shouldn't move. No upper arm should move. You're just keeping that door hinge idea kind of there and present for the student. So now that we've kind of talked about, the basic ideas of bowing and moving all of that, we want to get a example kind of hearing what that good tone sounds like. So in order to get a good tone, so we said earlier, setting up your foundation of bowing in order to get tone. In order to get that good tone, we have to apply the right amount of weight from the bow pressing down to the string, as well as moving the bow at a comfortable speed, right? So if I were to play just open D with the right amount of pressure and speed, right? That in itself sounds pretty clear, sounds pretty nice. Now, the most students, when you tell them, give a good amount of weight on the bow and move the bow at a good speed, they get scared of their instrument all of a sudden. So the sound that usually happens sounds a little something like this. It's beautiful. So instead of actually moving the bow and thinking, I need to apply the right weight, they just press super hard on the strings, and then they just don't want to move the bow. And you get that nice kind of like scraping sound, which sends me chills all the time. But that's what happens. So, if even with that amount of weight, if you move the bow a little bit more comfortably, you'll get a good sound. But you have to put the two into action, into that one motion. And that's how you kind of get that sound. So again, I'll give you one more example. If I'm playing, your left hand, which we discussed earlier, should have the right amount of weight of the fingers pressing down. And then if you just kind of comfortably move the bow at a good speed with a good weight, it'll give you a good sound. So I'm going to play it how it should sound, and then afterwards I'm going to follow it up with moving the bow, one, not keeping that square of the bow arm, and two, not applying the right speed, but maintaining the exact same pressure as I play the note. So listen, give it a listen. So the first one sounds better. And the second one kind of threw me back into like my elementary school days, where that's basically what we all sounded like, which is fine. You all got to start somewhere. So making sure that you're moving the bow at a good speed, and that was the same weight, just slower for moving the bow. So just make sure that you're applying both of those ideas into one movement, into one focus. Now, when we look back at the Suzuki book, he does an amazing job at actually applying two separate ideas of bowing into his book. Legato, which is a smooth, kind of connected, I like to think of buttery kind of sound, and as well as the staccato idea, which is a stopped, more controlled, more focused form of bow movement. So the first one is going to be shown in Lightly Row, which is like our second piece in the book. It's really, really fun because students love hearing a folk song that's kind of familiar. A lot of students are actually very familiar with the tune. And I'm just going to go ahead and play the first two lines of Lightly Row. And I want you to pay attention to what we call the legato style of bowing, which is going to be that smooth, that connected, that buttery style of movement. So go ahead and listen for just one moment. Great piece. Kids love that song. And it's really, really easy to kind of just connect each of these notes because they're not very difficult. So again, this is the second piece in the book. Now, this is probably the easiest one that you can use to work on your ideas of bowing, to work on that legato bowing. You've got half notes and quarter notes in the entire thing, so it's kind of easier just to keep them all connected. The next piece in the book that does a lot of focus on the bowing is going to be Long, Long Ago, which is a couple of pieces after. And in this one in particular, we have quarter notes and eighth notes. So trying to keep those eighth notes connected is a little bit more of a challenge, but it's still the same concept. You want to keep them smooth, you want to keep them connected, and let each of the notes kind of just flow through. So I'm going to go ahead and play you just this first line of Long, Long Ago. I want you to listen to that legato movement. So you've got that. It's really, really nice, really connected. Now you have to start working on keeping that idea of the legato movement and applying it to eighth and quarter notes, right? So that's basically all the rhythms that are in this piece. You got some half notes written in there too, but mainly the focus is going to be on keeping the eighth notes smooth and connected. So that's our idea on the legato bowings. Now, when we start discussing staccato bowings, this is usually where students have a harder time understanding that concept, mainly because with staccato bowing, the bow has to have more control, right? You have to be able to stop the motion of the bow and be able to pick up still in time, still on beat. And for some students, that's a little bit more difficult to do. The best way to go about doing this actually does refer back to our idea of finger before bow movement, where we have that rest in between each note. That gives you that sensation of stopping the bow and actually controlling that movement before moving on to the next note. So in Suzuki's book, we work on a piece called Etude, which is just basically straight eighth notes. And you get to sit there and focus on that staccato movement. So I'm going to play you just the first line first, and then I'm going to follow it with that same idea that we talked about with finger before bow movement, applying that rest so that you can, one, place your fingers, and two, get that feeling of stopping the bow. So just the first line in both ways. So by applying those rests, you get to not worry, but focus on placing those fingers down before moving, as well as getting that feel of the staccato movement. In this etude piece, Suzuki also provides a variation, and in this variation, you get to do these 16th notes. Kids love this part because you're basically just brushing through your instrument, playing notes like quick, and that's fun. So with this variation, you get to play these notes faster, and you get to move the bow. So with 16th notes and playing 16th notes, you're moving the bow in a smooth way, but because of your change in direction, they automatically sound staccato, right? So it trains the ear to hear what that staccato sounds like while still kind of being able to just move the bow. So I'm just going to play you the first line again, this time with the variation. So because the eighth notes or the 16th notes are faster, the notes automatically sound staccato. They sound shorter because you're changing the direction of the bow, which does cause it requires a stopping motion, right? So Suzuki has this last piece in his book, which is awesome. And this piece is called the Gavotte by Gossip. And this piece is really, really interesting because one, it's pretty difficult. The piece itself has rhythms. You've got eighth notes, you've got a couple of grace notes, you've got 16th notes, and then you've got accidental sprinkled in here. You've got some repeats. You've got a different set of style in it. But our main reason why we're bringing this up in the idea of bowing and tone is because he actually does the dipping in between both worlds. He adds a lot of staccato and then a section basically where you're just sitting there playing in a very smooth, very connected motion, which is really, really great because that lets you kind of incorporate both of those ideas. Again, this piece is pretty difficult, and it's a really good thing to have it in this book because it lets the students kind of have a goal. If they hear it or you play it for them, most times they'll get scared of it. But it's like this is what you're working towards. This is your end goal piece, right? So I'm gonna play the entire thing, and I want you to go ahead and you can listen and see if you can hear those differences in bow styles in the changing staccato and legato feel. So tune in. It's just a fun tune. It's really, really good stuff to be able to play and be able to kind of work on the idea of those two different styles of bowing. Now, even though we had bowing and tone kind of mixed into that whole topic, you've got a long amount of time where we didn't get to discuss how that ties into the Haydn violin concerto. Now, looking at Haydn, even in the earlier piece, which is going to kind of have some of the chunk that I played earlier and some of the other parts, he has a specific section where he does staccato directly in the legato, and it's really, really fun. So I'm going to go ahead and play just this excerpt, and you get to hear how it's applied with that same idea of keeping the bow staccato and then moving it to legato, right? So give this a listen. So just in that small excerpt of like 5 measures, you're playing already, dipping in between both staccato and legato, leaving out the slurred notes. You're jumping in between the staccato movement and the legato movement. And again, Suzuki does an outstanding job of focusing on both of those bowing ideas and making it so that you build that foundation to be able to play, a piece such as that. So now's the fun part. For those of you that don't have the program, I'm actually going to play the Haydn Violin Concerto for you one more time, just right through this first movement. And the reason why this is fun is because you get to sit here and apply this new knowledge that you kind of just sat here and listened to for an hour, and see if you can find different parts in the piece that kind of show what it was that we focused on. So this is going to be the last thing of the program today, and I just enjoy it, have fun with that. And before I do that, I do just want to say again a huge thank you to John, who's been an amazing accompanist and a really, really great just person here on campus that I could always rely on and turn to, as well as Mara Gallagher, my string instructor. She's been a great mentor, a great instructor, a great friend to just have while I've been here, kind of just growing as a musician, and my friends and family who have supported me for my entire time here. It's been great. And last, North Central, for just letting me come here and just grow as a musician and just learn as much as I can. So enjoy the Haydn Violin Concerto. Thank you again for tuning in. And yeah.